Hi class, we are entering into chapter 3, the biology of behavior. It's an interesting chapter. It's the focus really in this particular chapter is the role of nature. There's a nurture component too, but this really emphasizes nature, what we're born with. It begins looking at genes and behavior, and I always like to start this particular chapter by asking somebody in the class, do you like to eat bananas? Bananas are nice fruit. And so usually somebody in the class will say, yeah, I like to eat bananas. And then I ask him, do you ever feel guilty about eating a banana? Do you ever feel guilty about that? And of course, they look at me, not usually. Why should I feel guilty about doing that? And then I explain to them that, in fact, when I eat a banana, I'm eating, a banana has 50% of the same DNA that I have. So it's kind of like cannibalism. You know, I don't know if you ever think about that when you eat a banana, but it's kind of like cannibalism. So sometimes what I'll do is, I'll feel bad about this, and so I'll leave my banana sitting there. And what happens when you leave a banana too long is that it turns usually green to yellow to brown to black, and then you've got these little fruit flies around them. And so I'll ask, you ever kill one of those fruit flies? You just smush one? You ever feel like, wow, I have taken the life of a fruit fly. I am powerful. When you know what's interesting about it is that fruit fly humans have, we're made up about, well, it crosses back and forth. Between 25 to 35,000 genes make up a human, the human genome, done by Dr. Watson. Won a Nobel Prize for that. But actually, a fruit fly, I'm thinking a fruit fly's got like, 3 genes? How many genes can it have? It has 14,000 genes. It's almost half as many genes as I've got. So then I really began to feel guilty. I just killed this creature that is so sophisticated. And so it kind of it kind of makes me sit back and look at this particular chapter and realize, wow, how amazing our bodies are. How amazing our brain is, all the neurons are. It's just an amazing chapter as I delve through it. So let's just kind of venture through some key components that I like to emphasize. First, they do talk about the role of the principle of behavioral genetics. Under this category, they talk about the relationship between specific genes. Behavior is complex, using many genes involved. It's usually not just 2 genes. You can't say anxiety is the cause of this gene that's been inherited, or alcoholism is the cause of this particular gene. It's usually much more complex than that. Another principle of behavioral genetics is that they study identical twins. Now the key goal in here is they know identical twins have the same DNA, but they want to find out, what does it look like when they've been separated at birth and raised in 2 separate environments. And that's the fascinating thing, because then you can really tease out the role that nurture plays and nature plays. And that kind of ties this together with the environmental influences. And so that is the 3 basic principles of behavioral genetics. Relationship between specific genes is complex. Studying twins and adoptees, as well as genetic markers. Behavioral geneticists can disentangle the characteristics of heredity, and the environmental influences, how and when genes affect behavior. For example, we do know that specifically in schizophrenia, for a good example, that somebody will have the predisposition for the genetic predisposition for schizophrenia. But there's a diathesis stress model. And what that says is that when there's a specific stressor, that acts as a catalyst to turn on that gene. And so that's the third component when you look at the principle of behavioral genetics, is what is the catalyst that turns it on? That's why we see more often in males, we'll see schizophrenia occurring between the age of 18 and 22. Well, what happens during that time? Usually there's emancipation. They're going away to the military, they're going away to college, they're living on their own. Those stressors function in that way. For females, we see it actually occurring a little bit later. It's like about think most of the research is like between 25 to 30. We'll just say that range for him. Well, what happens at a time? Well, now, 25 to 30, you're probably getting married, probably having children. Dealing with those stressors can act as a catalyst to turn on that gene. And so those are the 3 principles of behavioral genetics that the text talks about. The next thing, they look at the nervous system, which is just a fascinating, to me, it's all just amazing. Every time I teach this, I'm just amazed at how our body functions. For example, have you ever wondered, if, I always worry a little bit about this. When I fly with my wife, I always give her the window seat. I do that because it's, she likes the window seat, but also I think, just me, well, what would happen if somebody is sucked out of the window? I figure she's going to go first. Not very hard at that. She knows about it. She knows the whole process. She also likes the window seat. But if I did get sucked out, what would happen to me? How would I, could I survive the fall? And what we find is that those individuals that jump off the Empire State Building and they fall to their death, and there's always a reporter there who says, don't worry, they didn't feel any pain when they hit the ground. Well, you wonder, how do they know that? How do they know they didn't feel any pain? I worry about that when I get on the plane, And so what's interesting is this is how they know they felt no pain. And that is when I step on a nail and I feel that sharp pain on my foot, it goes to my brain, and then from my brain back down to my foot, I lift my foot up. Well, the speed of those neurons is 250 miles per hour. And so that's an amazing, it's so many neurons. Your brain is made up of 100 billion neurons. And so it's amazing going from my foot to my brain and then back, how fast that has to occur. So if you find yourself sucked out of an airplane, what I encourage you to do is just dive for it. Try to get faster than 250 miles per hour. When you hit the ground, you won't feel a thing. That's the good side. Don't try to coast yourself and slow down. Probably not going to help very much. All right. So that is a little brief introduction to the nervous system. It's very detailed. The notes are very detailed. I do have a picture of a neuron that shows the direction or the processing of information from one neuron to the other neuron. It is amazing the detail that goes into our bodies, developed our bodies. And then the next section is the brain. The brain is amazingly complex. There's so many different components to it. In my class, I typically will just have them appreciate the complexity and beauty of all the different components of the brain. And it's amazing. I'm always amazed that any of us turn out okay. There's a thing called neuronal migration. We'll talk about in in the chapter of developmental psychology, where all of a sudden the cells just migrate to the different areas: the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the corpus callosum. It's amazing how that occurs. So what we do know is that when we look at the brain, the way we used to study the brain is when somebody had a damage to it. Probably the most famous was Phineas Gage, who was a man who had this rod shoot up through his eye socket, out through his brain. He was working on a railroad. And we noticed that he had a total different change of personality. And what happened was that rod affected the prefrontal lobes, which affects our ability to delay impulsivity, or delay gratification, resist impulsivity, and it's a part of our executive function, our ability to kind of figure out problems in the world. And what we find is that individuals today that have traumatic brain injuries that affect that part of the brain, lo and behold, many times they have a different personality, or not a different person, their personality changes. Then it goes through, let's see where we're at here, guys. Again, this is just a brief introduction to it. One thing I want to emphasize is the brain's plasticity. That's extremely important. I always tell my patients that come to see me that had a traumatic brain injury, not to get too concerned when they've got this loss, that the brain has tremendous plasticity. It reorganizes itself. It tries to compensate for the loss that has occurred. There's been some amazing case studies regarding that. Michael Rabin being one example, where he had the left side of his brain had to be removed due to a seizure disorder. The left side of the brain, Broca's region, Wernicke's region, deals with a language and our ability to express and comprehend language. And so when this happened, I think he was 6 or 7 years of age, can't remember off the top of my head. But what's interesting about it is that even though the left side of the brain was removed, the right side compensated for him, and he was able to understand speech and speak just like you or I, which is pretty amazing. Again, just a testimony of the brain's plasticity. In fact, I have a friend of mine now who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he's quite concerned about it, but I emphasize to him that, the brain has tremendous plasticity. It's not over till it's over, and there's certainly some things that one can do to possibly reverse, but at least, at the very least, delay the onset of Alzheimer's, the effects of Alzheimer's. They talk about measuring the brain, EEGs, MRIs. New one is a DTI. Another new one for the text is near infrared spectrometry. All these are just different ways of looking at the brain, so we no longer do we have to wait for somebody to have a traumatic brain injury. We can take a picture of what's going on in the brain right now. And that's just an amazing, just an amazing opportunity to advance the science of psychology. And then the last part of the text looks at the endocrine system, and that's where they talk about the adrenal glands, cortisol, pituitary glands, hormones. All of those are all put together. There's a nice picture of that endocrine system in your text too. Kind of ties it all together. And so, guys, with that said, that is an introduction to Chapter 3. Again, you guys always can feel free to give me a call, email me, text me, or message me through Moodle if you have any questions at all. Thank you so much for your patience. Appreciate your hard work this semester so far, and I hope you enjoy the chapter.